Let's start with a word of prayer, and then we will get into talking about boundaries. God, thank you so much for this beautiful weather we have today. We are so grateful to be in this space and to be with each other. And I pray that our conversation today will be full of your spirit, God, full of your wisdom. And we pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Well, why don't we start by a little review from the last class we had. Because it's been a while. We skipped over last week. Last week was Easter. We had our Easter breakfast. And so we weren't able to be together. And some of you may not have been here for that first class, so it'll be helpful for you to catch up and kind of hear where that conversation was. So let's kick off there. What do you remember, if anything, from that first conversation we had a couple of weeks ago?
Comfort zones.
What's that?
Comfort zones.
Comfort zones? Yeah, what about comfort zones?
Well, our boundaries are, we have our space, that's one, sort of defensive, but then we also want to project what we think, so that's, dare say, offensive, but I'm supposed to ask me that question.
Sorry. Yeah, we did talk about comfort zones, right? And part of it was part of the part of the importance of boundaries is if you recognize that something is kind of encroaching on that comfort zone that you're not ready to receive, then a boundary is helpful to keep that back. What else?
How to say no, didn't we talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I think someone shared that no is a complete sentence, and the importance of sometimes just saying no. Yeah, good.
We talked about why boundaries are hard. Does anyone remember any of those? Why are boundaries hard for us? Why is it hard to say no?
Afraid of how people will perceive us.
Yeah, there's a lot of social pressure that we're afraid of. I think some mentioned too, there's some kind of spiritual baggage that we carry too that makes it hard to keep up boundaries. So if we've been taught that highest importance is selflessness, we don't want to be selfish, we're here to serve. If those are the narratives driving us, which aren't bad narratives, but if that's the only things in our brains as we try to approach a lot of these situations, it makes it really difficult for us to say no and feel like we're doing the right thing.
For me, Catholic guilt.
Oh, okay, yeah. We have another brand that's similar to Christ.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about this morning, I don't think that we articulated it as such, but I think it's really important to remember, you cannot control other people as much as we would love to. You cannot control other people. So boundaries are about what you can control. Like you could ask someone to stop gossiping, but you can't control whether they stop gossiping. What you can control is whether you remain in the room while that continues, right? So like these distinctions, I think are really important as we go forward, keeping in mind, boundaries are about what I can control and what am I going to do with myself if that behavior continues.
Yeah.
So if that's helpful for anybody.
Another thing we talked about was, why are we talking about this in the Bible class, right? And I love, y'all threw out so many great examples of boundaries in Scripture, and a lot of them that I hadn't thought of. So that was, I think, helpful to see that boundaries they have a place in Scripture. That we can look at the Bible and say, okay, now here's examples of where either God or Jesus or other leaders in Scripture needed boundaries and articulated them. The other thing is that we talked about was we're a community of faith. And anytime people are together, boundaries are going to have to be a thing. And not just because we want to protect ourselves from each other, boundaries actually help create closeness if they're done well, right? Because what you're doing is articulating your needs, other people are articulating their needs, and then there can be a kind of genuine selflessness, right? Often what we call selflessness is really just us trying to satisfy our own need for whatever by being there for everybody, right? And so this can kind of create a genuine selflessness where other needs, I'm paying attention to other people's needs, they've been articulated to me, and then I can go from there. Jim?
One thing that I have a problem with that is make sure that your boundaries are not based on tradition. You have to be real careful with that, because some of us come up through real strict stuff, and sometimes that hits people the wrong way. And we've been talking about this at our church, that need to be careful. We had a young man come in a week or so ago, wore his ball cap all the way through the service, and there was people that were upset about it.
Yeah,
But, you know, he was there,
right,
and if you approach him wrong, he may not never come back.
right.
You know, we have to be careful that we don't get tradition and boundaries and stuff confused.
That's great.
That's right.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently. I came from a Pentecostal church. You dressed up, you never wore any pants, shorts,
Yeah.
things of that nature. And yeah, you know, different culture. It's a culture,
Yes,
right?
There's sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a, phrase, common phrase, treat other people how you want to be treated, right? It's golden rule. But what if we treated other people the way they want to be treated? Sometimes the way I want to be treated is different from the way you want to be treated. So boundaries are a way for us to communicate that, and for other people to communicate that with us.
If anybody had the right, I guess, to condemn, not only God can do that, but I guess Paul, when he entered Athens, he could have condemned all these pagans to hell for all these idols and monuments, but instead he said, I perceive that you are a religious people. Let me talk to you about this.
Look what he could affirm first.
Somebody says it's not so much what people say as it is how we respond to what people say. There's a famous story of General Grant before he was president. He was still a general, but a couple of his general friends, when they were having a little group meetings, was fond of telling off-color jokes. And one of them looked around and said, I don't see any ladies present. And right then, General Grant interrupted him and said, no, but there are gentlemen present. And then he just cut it off right there. How do we respond to what people say?
Yeah, that's good. I think one more important piece of what we discussed like 2 weeks ago was our definition of boundaries. And again, y'all put up a lot of great stuff on the board. But one of the things we want to talk about today is that there's two pieces that are important for boundaries. One is to figure out what your boundaries are, right? What are those lines? Where are those places that we don't want people to encroach on the comfort zone, or however you want to think about it? And then the other side is communicating that, right? You don't have a boundary unless other people know it's a boundary, right? That you articulate it. And what we want to do is talk about that first piece today. How do you figure out your boundaries? How do you know what boundaries you need? And to kick that off, I want to read one of our biblical examples that we came up with from last week. This is Exodus 18. And the story of Moses kind of being overwhelmed with all the work that's in front of him, and then his father-in-law Jethro coming in and giving some important advice for how he should navigate this. So this is Exodus 18, verse 13. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. Okay, so already you can see the problem, right? Not just for Moses, but for everyone else too, right? Moses being judge is like when a new iPhone is released at the Apple store, right? People are lined up, camping out for days. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Okay, so Moses has important work here, right? The people are coming to him to seek God's will. He has this connection with God. He's the one that's delivered the commandments, the law to the people. And so he has this authority to say, okay, no, this is right, this is what God wants, or no, that's not what God wants. And so he kind of has this unique role. And so he's trying to protect that. He wants to do that work. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I'll give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they're to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided for themselves. All right, so help us unpack that a little, Leanne.
Yeah, what immediately jumps out at you from this story, or what resonates with you about this story?
Establishment of justice, or foundation of justice. I mean, how we have judges, they had one, and then broke up into many judges.
Right.
Like we have Supreme Court, and it breaks down.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and Moses is kind of functioning as the Supreme Court here, but that doesn't mean there are lower courts, right? They can handle things, and then it's only if they can't figure it out that it gets bumped up the line, right? That's good.
Any research been done on well, that's the onset of what we call common law. You know, there are statutory rules in court that decide, okay, that's against the law, you can't do that. But then there are some gray areas, and then we have what we call common law, which is not a written law, a court decision that says, well, yeah, we can do this or we can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not written in the statutes, that's called what we call common law. I'm curious to know how many of the many laws that are in Leviticus and Deuteronomy were the result of some of those common law decisions that the judges over 1,000, 500, 150, 10,
Right.
rather than direct communication to Moses from God. Are any of those subject to this common law review, and that was that particular judge's opinion? I mean, otherwise, everything that was brought to one of these judges, they could just say, well, that's nonsense, here it is, it's the law, it's what God said.
Right.
But these judges, who were wise and spiritual men, made their decision. So you get the impression there was a common law element in there instead of statutory. This is what God says, but this is how we can interpret that. What
So I don't know about that specifically, or that language of common law. But I think, oftentimes when we read the New Testament, when we look at the way the Pharisees operated, I think oftentimes we think, well, like they had all this tradition and that was the problem, right? They're layering all this tradition, and that does become a problem. Like Jesus calls that out, right? But I think probably where that starts for them is from this genuine place of, gosh, lives are complicated, human community is complicated, and so we've passed down not only the law, but also what Jews call midrash, which are all these teachings about how to apply the law, right? And that's what the Pharisees have received and are taking hold of and trying to help other people. It's like this shared communal wisdom down through the ages, which has
why the character is so important of
That's
the
right.
people and I think that's why that's mentioned in here, why it is so important that they're choosing the kinds of people that they're choosing. It's not just who's available, but it's who's the best for this because of the character, because they are going to have to discern what the right decision is.
With respect to boundaries, though, what stood out to me there was the father-in-law had concern for Moses, and Moses did not have any boundary about what he was taking in, and just oftentimes that's me, I can do it all, I'll just do it all, because I don't know if I could trust him, but you just get into that position. And the father-in-law, out of concern, said, why are you doing everything? Why don't you set up a system and just like found a way to help them?
Well, then in verse 18, 13, Moses' father-in-law says to Moses, "What you are doing is not good." And that really sticks out to me because Moses thought he was doing
Yeah.
what God was telling him to do.
Right.
But then to have somebody that he trusts, that he's close with, who's also trying to honor God, saying like, no, actually, you trying to help in this situation like that isn't good.
It takes
That was-
courage to say that to somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he said that kindly and gently, but directly. And, you know, I mean, we talked about, as we were talking about this lesson, talking about, oh, this is, you know, Moses and his boundaries, but also his father-in-law. What if Moses didn't listen? What if Moses said, no, I think my system is good. I think the way, you know, I can handle this. This is the way it needs to be because God chose me. Well, his father-in-law would have to decide, is that now it's on Moses. I've spoken my piece, and that's where my area of influence ends, and now that's it. That's all I can do. Donna had.
Another thing that wasn't good about it, and I didn't really realize it till just reading it out loud in class today, was other people weren't being equipped because Moses was doing it.
Yeah.
So that wasn't good because Moses is gonna be gone, and so nobody else is getting ready to and prepared to pick up the baton. I always thought of this as being a huge sigh of relief for Moses, but now I'm realizing, as a parent or anybody, you know, it's easier to do a job yourself. Many times the process of training,
Yeah.
and that had to have been enormous to prepare, especially because they were preparing for gray area discernment, not just necessarily black and white, you know, right and wrong stuff. So
That's a great point.
that setting of a boundary was just putting him in a different line of work. It really wasn't letting him go on vacation or anything.
Right.
You know, the other thing that's interesting about this, if you back up, Moses had sent his wife and kids to Jethro. He was camped with the people doing all this work.
Yeah.
So basically, he had sent his wife home. I got too much work to do. Here's what I read. It's not what it says, but you know, if you read that, and I think Jethro may have thought personally, this is not good either.
Right.
You're not being a father to your kids or a wife or a husband to your.
Right.
There's personal issues here as well.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
What if the people did not like that Moses had delegated responsibility to other people? Have you been in that situation before? Like, what if the people went, but Moses is the person we want to go to? Sometimes this happens with ministers at other churches. But I want that person. I want the preacher always to be the one to answer my questions. Or, you know, or whatever situation. That happens in all kinds of contexts.
Yeah.
How would Moses need to respond to that? What would he need in order to, you know, like what would that take to have to go, but this is the decision I'm making. And he would have to stick to that boundary. He'd have to communicate that once he had decided this is how we're gonna do it, right?
But you also have to realize that there were a lot of people who were not in tune yet. I remember they had to wander 40 years in the wilderness to get rid of a lot of them. And so he's also having to pick these judges from among some people, you know, for whom it hasn't been decided yet. Let's wander in the wilderness for 40 years until we can weed out these people. So I can imagine it wasn't an easy thing to do. There were a lot of people who were anxious to serve God, and there were a lot of people who had become Egyptianized. And well, remember, Moses asked, what if the people, when I say God says, let's go into the wilderness and worship him, what if they ask me, who is this God? What do you mean, who is this God? This is the God of Abraham. Well, they've been in Egypt for 400 years. Half of them had probably become totally Egyptianized and didn't even, you know, they knew they were descendants of some guy named Abraham, but, you know, we like to think it's so crystal clear now, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times when we talk about boundaries, we talk about the word no a lot, which we've, you know, has come up several times today, came up in our first class. But what boundaries are really doing is deciding where you're gonna put your yes. Okay? So what is Moses, what yes is he trying to protect in this story? It could be more than one, and may not even necessarily know for sure.
Repeat the question again, please.
What are the yeses that Moses is trying to protect by by changing the structure this way.
He says these people are trying to seek God's will, and I'm trying to help them.
Yeah.
That's the yes he said.
Yes.
A yes to empowering others to do what he's doing.
And it may be saying yes to his family, like Michael mentioned.
Yeah, I think it may have been Donna that said nobody else was being equipped yet. I mean,
Yeah.
God is trying to create a people here. And if the only person that really gets it is Moses, then once he's gone, he's gone. God doesn't want just one person, he wants people. And so I think the yes is to training and equipping, and preparing God's whole people to continue this.
And if he wasn't doing a good job at it, then he was probably feeling bad about it. Because you usually can tell, I'm just not cutting it. I'm burning myself out. And I'm making rash decisions and stuff. If you keep saying yes to everything, you're going to quickly burn through stuff. And so he can say yes to, okay, I'm going to not do these other things so I can be really good at the things I need to be good at.
That's right.
So what I'm gathering is that a boundary of no is a yes?
I think if we say,
How'd you answer that, David?
yeah, kind of. So we all have tons of things we could say yes to, right? But every yes we say means we're saying no to some other stuff, right? We just don't have enough time in today, right? And so what we really want to do is pick which things we're saying no to so that we can pick which things we want to say yes to,
Okay.
right? So that, because oftentimes what happens is we say yes to, it's like first come, first serve, right? And we just start saying yes to things, and before we know it, all of a sudden we're doing all this stuff. Either we're overworked, or we're pouring ourselves into things that actually we aren't good at, aren't called to do, or just shouldn't be spending our time, and we're missing our priorities, right? And so the challenge with boundaries is, okay, if I want to know what I need to say no to, the first step is, what are the things that are really important for me to say yes to, right? And so for Moses, I want to say yes to my family. Like, I don't want to live this separate life from them, right? I want to say yes to leading God's people and making sure I'm connected with God, right? That's another piece of that is that Jethro tells him. You have this connection to God. It's really important for you to have that. And so you need to protect that. Protect your time to be with God. And then also the equipping, right? I've got to say yes to not just being the authority on all things, but making sure the authority of God has seeped into all of God's people so that they know it themselves. It's not just me, right? And so if those are the three most important yeses that I need to say yes to, then now I can start saying no to some things, right?
Those are decisions.
Right,
based on- okay.
right, yeah.
Thank
That's good. Good question.
We're passing around some worksheets. I made 40, which I don't know if is going to be enough. Also, I didn't keep one for myself, so I have no idea what's on it. That's not true. I do know.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you. I'll give it back afterwards. Can we talk about this? Thanks. Do you want me to talk about it?
Because then you
Oh, okay.
can. Okay, so we're not going to do this right now, mostly because we don't have time. But this is kind of a worksheet to help you work through discerning exactly what we were just talking about. What do I want to say yes to so that I can figure out what I need to say no to, right? So I can figure out what boundaries. Because this is the first piece of having good boundaries, is discernment. We've got to figure out what boundaries I need to have. And so these are hopefully just some helpful questions to get your gears running on discerning all that.
And sometimes it's easier to figure out what do we want to say yes to than to go, what do I need to say no to right now?
Right.
That's a hard place to start. So what do I really want to say yes to, or what's really most important to me right now can be a lot easier to start with.
Yep. And so you see that first question on there, what are you currently saying yes to in your life, right? This is just taking stock, listing all the things that you've got to say yes to right now. And I mean, we all have a ton of stuff, right? There's family obligations, there's friends we want to keep up with, there are work obligations, there's church stuff, whatever your kids are involved in, personal health, like am I working out, am I taking care of, am I going to the doctor, there's tons of stuff that we're all doing, right? So what are you currently saying yes to? It may be helpful to pull out the calendar and actually see, okay, what am I making time for? Because that's often a good way to judge all that. And then there's a couple of follow-up questions. So how well do your yeses line up with your values? So there may be things that we're saying yes to that, okay, I want to be a person who is a good father, right? That is a value of mine. Now, what I need to do is look at how I'm actually spending time to see if the way I'm spending time lines up with that value, right? Am I making time for my kids? Am I showing up with their stuff? Am I having one-on-one time with each of them? Like all these kinds of things. Take stock of, okay, I say I want this. This is what I want to say yes to. And is what I'm actually doing aligning with that? Because so often we're just blind to that, right? We are, what's the line? The heart is deceptive above all else, right? It's just so hard to see ourselves. And so it's helpful to press the pause button and say, okay, here's the kind of person I want to be. Is the way I'm spending my time actually in alignment with that? So that's what that question's getting at. And then the second one is, how many of your yeses are realistically sustainable for you right now? There are seasons in life, right? Where there are just a lot of yeses that you have to take on. I think early on when you got a newborn in the house, there's a lot of yeses that you have to take care of with that. And that may not be a time when you want to take on another job that has way more hours involved, right? So we've got to take stock of that too. How many yeses can I actually afford to give right now? Because of other things, other priorities that I have to say yes to. And then you start discerning, right? Those are a couple of clarifying questions. Then as you look at your list, identify the top 3 that are most important to you. What are the top 3 things I just absolutely want to say yes to? This is the kind of person I want to be. So I'm going to protect these 3 things at all costs. And 3 is just an arbitrary number. You can discern how many needs to be.
You can do more than 3.
That's right, or less. And then what do you need to do to protect your ability to say yes to those things? Okay, so that's where the no's start coming in, right? Okay, here's what I want to spend my time doing. These are the top 3 priorities, my yeses. Now, how do I protect my ability to do those things? What do I need to say no to in order to make sure I can do these things? Okay, so that's what that worksheet is, and hopefully that's helpful as you discern where boundaries need to be.
Which part of that feels the hardest for you?
Yeah.
But I think that, this is kind of answering Leanne's question, but it is also just a comment. We have an 8-month-old, and like going into that season we also have a 10-year-old, so, it's a huge life change, after 10 years adding other kids. So when we went into that season, I don't think that we did a good job of, pruning, because the baby was gonna take up so much time, and we were already kind of stretched thin as it was. One thing that I've just been working on the last few years is especially as women, I'm not gonna speak to any demands of men, but we're kind of trained to you give 100% to each one of your kids, you give 100% to your husband, you give 100% to keeping the house clean, and I like to say, I'm only one pie. I can't give 100% to everything.
Yeah.
And so when I was super frustrated, because I did take on the new job right before I had a baby, it was very unrealistic. I wrote down on a paper plate just all the things that I had on my plate, and I just showed Dorian. I was like, okay, this is everything I'm doing. I have to be able to take something off my plate, because this is not sustainable. I can't function emotionally, especially with, the newborn and not having any sleep and breastfeeding and everything. So that's kind of what I did as a visual to help myself, and it's what I highly recommend to especially people who are getting married, because it's like a totally different transformation to have a new kid, to get married. You're going to have to give time to that relationship.
Right.
And it's going to be a huge change. And I think a lot of people go into those huge changes like we did, kind of oh, okay, yeah, we'll just take it up and it'll be fine. We'll just add it. But no, something huge has to be removed from that pie,
Right.
to have space
for a crying baby every, that needs to eat every, 30 minutes.
So that makes me think, did y'all see the stuff about Marie Kondo, what is it?
Tidy.
The tidy up?
something.
Yeah. And what changed, Kristen was telling me about this. And she hates that I'm asking this, but I can't remember it. I just
So
thought,
she's like the main person who did the whole get rid of all your stuff, keeping everything tidy, don't ever leave the room without it being tidy. And she had a whole book and TV series, and then she has now come out, now that she has 3 kids, and has said, you can't keep your life tidy. You have to- Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's exactly
her
what you're saying.
criterion still holds, right?
It still holds,
What gives you joy?
yeah.
Yeah.
But on top of that, sacrifice.
yeah.
You have to sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you're going to sacrifice
Hey, regardless.
So
That's
hopefully
right.
you can choose, this helps you choose.
Right, yeah.
What is it,
Mhm.
be intentional about what is it that I'm going to intentionally pull out.
Right.
I love, you said it really fast, but the example of pruning is perfect for boundaries because, yeah, it hurts. These are things that they may even be beautiful, they may even be good, but we are taking them out so that what's left can flourish.
That's good.
It might be a run at
Sometimes-
Walmart on people's plates.
For me, sometimes it's the discernment of whether something is going toward my values or not. So I have a value of being a good mom, and then I get approached about, do you want to be on the committee for the 8th grade dance? I'm like, I want to be a good mom. I want to be a good mom.
Do I
Is
have to
this-
be on that committee to
Do
be
I
a good
need to
mom?
be on the committee in order to be a good mom?
Great.
Is that equating, or is that just, is there something bigger?
Is there a way to be a good mom
Yeah,
without,
without
and still
that.
be able to say no? Yeah,
Tho-
great
Those
question.
are the things that are just always in the gray, and I
And I
have to
hit you when it's unexpected.
always think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was at I guess it was the beginning of last year, a lot of last year, I stepped into a leadership position with Manna. And as we kind of grew really fast and we moved buildings and there was a lot that kind of exploded quicker than we'd expected. At one point, I realized I am here 3 Saturday mornings each month. I have 3 kids at home. And while I can find people to stay with them most of those Saturday mornings, what I had been doing for a long time was, if someone's available to come over, that means I'm available to come to Manna. And at a certain point, I went, you know what, this is not, Saturday mornings are its own special sacred thing with your family, right, with your kids. And so I had to get really intentional about how much can I realistically give to this ministry that is wonderful and I love and it's a big part of my life and I believe in it, but how much has to be me or how much might be able to be some other people. And so, but I literally had to take my calendar out and write on there, I want to have 2 free Saturdays every month and then mark them out. Or, I had to keep that line in front of me, 2 free Saturdays, 2 free Saturdays. So if I was at a conference one weekend, I couldn't be at Manna. It also meant that took up one of my Saturdays. It wasn't I can have 2 Saturdays at Manna every month. So anyway, it was so helpful for me though to actually take it to the calendar because otherwise it just wouldn't happen. And you had this great line that I think Mike Cope maybe had said about the calendar, but I can't remember what it was.
Oh, yeah, beat everyone else to your calendar,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
That I want to be the first one to fill this thing out. So it's filled with the things that are most important to me, the things I need to do. Because again, so often people come at you with requests or needs, and if your calendar's already just sitting there empty, well then, okay, well yeah, I know I am available then. And then all of a sudden I'm not available for all the other stuff I really do need to be doing. The things that are more in line with my values. Right?
No, I don't actually have anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, so here's a hypothetical situation. And maybe this sounds familiar. You work every day, 9 to 5. Something comes up at work though on a Saturday, and you get an email from your boss saying, "Hey, I need this done today." What does it look like to have healthy boundaries in that situation? Oh,
She's laughing at me because I'm the one that sends the email.
He's the
too.
one sending
Adrian,
the
you may
email.
not want to answer this question. She sent this one out.
Well, we have responsibilities that we've agreed to, okay, at work,
Yeah.
and it's to make sure stuff happens. And because of that, there's probably boundaries that we have to set aside to make sure that some ultimate responsibility does get taken care of.
Yeah.
And so if stuff's gonna fall apart, if you don't follow through with your responsibilities, just because you said, well, but today I was gonna do this other thing, you may have to say, okay, well, I'm not gonna get to do my other thing. I have to stop and do this important thing that I've already promised.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, I'm going to be successful at this task.
Yeah.
So when-
Yeah, so and one thing is to, okay, we can look at all these like separate tasks, right? But beyond that, I like the language of responsibility. I am responsible for whatever this area is, right? And so as I'm prioritizing, I need to think about what does it mean for me to prioritize this responsibility and everything that it entails about being responsible for this, right? Because you're right, there are.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Sorry,
go ahead.
finish. Okay. This is such a hard example because as you were, like you're saying this, there are so many factors that come into play and there's so much discernment. And there may be Saturdays that even though, yeah, I'm not working on the weekends, there may be Saturdays that you have to say yes. And so you have to discern whether now is the time to say yes. Maybe a better way to phrase this is, let's say you and your boss have agreed you don't work on Saturdays and this happens every Saturday.
Mhm.
This starts to happen chronically where you're getting emails from work every Saturday. And then at that point, how do you handle that? That's so hard. If that's the agreement you've made, maybe you have an agreement where you work on Saturdays and then this isn't on issue.
Well, I guess
but-
that was kind of what came to my head is,
Yeah.
you have to have already established a boundary and an expectation with your boss beforehand. I didn't have an expectation with my boss, and so she booked me whenever she felt like it. And so I finally got to a point where like, okay, my boss is me. When you're self-employed, you just do all the things every time at any point in time. And then Michael started to be like, hey, why are you working right now? It's 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. He just would say like, I didn't even realize how much I was working until it was brought up to me and I said, okay, I'm gonna establish some boundaries. I'm not gonna work on Sundays, ever. I'm not going to work, Saturdays after 4 p.m., ever. And that really cut down on some of the the work that I had because people like coming out on Saturdays at, 4 p.m. to take pictures, but now it's like, it's not available, so find another time. That was a very hard transition to make, but it had to be established on my own. I had to get to my calendar first, and then just make no exceptions.
Yeah.
Every public school teacher in the state of Texas has a contract outlining responsibilities, and there's always that bullet point and other duties.
Right, that's right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on that note, my principal had told me, like, you're on salary, and so if you have to stay in this building till 9 o'clock at night to get your work done, then you have to stay until 9 o'clock at night. And I had to be like, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not realistic. And even, it meant that I had to look at, like, other teachers and how they were managing the responsibilities, and I had to see that even though my number one priority was student success, that the other teachers were recognizing that if you don't turn in this report or that report, if you don't do what, those things that they're really looking for, then they're going to expect you to, put in all these extra hours. And so I kind of had to back down on the student success. Like, I had to be like, okay, you're working independently. I'm not going to pull a small group for 20 minutes because I need to do this work that has to be turned in.
Right.
And that's such a hard decision, like Leanne said. It's like, it's a good thing to work with the children, but if you work with the children 100% of the time, then you don't have time to do those other responsibilities. So just even looking at the time that you spend on a task and and doing the same analysis inside that task is super important.
Yeah.
I think sometimes too, it goes from boundaries to animosity, because at that point, you feel like you're being you know, you're calling me on Saturdays, but I can look on the computer, you're at the games, and, but I'm, you know, I'm feeling guilty because I'm not saying no. You know, I'm not standing up for myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, with boundaries, I think it's hard, especially when you start out, like at work, you know, when I first started, at my job right now, I didn't have any boundaries, so sometimes I would say, you know, come work on Saturdays, you know, okay, we're super busy, work on Sundays, and sometimes we'll be like, yes, no, but then now as Samuel group is growing up, and then now with Shadrach, now it's far more important than ever that, like you said, there are some times that I could say, okay, yes, I could work that day, but it's going to take away from all of these things, so I have to be, you know, really careful. If it's a one-time thing, okay, yeah, but if it's one of those things, every day, or every Saturday, then no, that's, we, you know, and I have a hard time with that, with setting boundaries, especially, the company where I work at, we have people that make 5 digits, 6 digits, and 7 digits. But I do have to tell the people that make 7 digits, they have a 24-hour cell phone where they will cancel everything that they're doing and anything that they're doing, and they'll pick up the phone. And I'm like, well, that's a big sacrifice, but that's you know, that's what they do to earn those 7 digits, and that's really hard.
It's very hard. That's very hard.
Question. So how do you apply, because I'm looking at Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 through 24. How do you apply that to what we're speaking of? It says, whatever you do, do it enthusiastically as something done done for the Lord and not for men, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord, Yahusha. For the wrong, you know, how do you apply that? Because it resonates for me in this instance. I'm a volunteer. I'm a disabled veteran. I got time, but yet I like to do things and get things done.
Yeah.
So with that being said, it's like with my volunteering, I have a set schedule. I want to say yes to everything because, again, I don't have much time.
Right.
I got a whole bunch of time. So, you know.
And you can say, if you have the time, what we are not saying is that you have to say no all the time. But it's you discerning, how much time do I have? How much resources, how much energy, you know, can I give my best to this? And at some point, you won't be able to give your best to something.
Right.
Because of all the other things, you know, that you've said yes to. But if you have the time, you know, it's discerning what you have and then where you want to be intentional about putting that.
Okay.
Does that
And
help?
same
And if they-
thing, sometimes you'll double up on yourself,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because you'll say yes to 2 separate things. Okay, if they're on the calendar, they're in the exact same spot, you can't do both, or you'll try to do both and they'll be both bad. And so now you've let down whoever you think you're gonna actually do something good for, and it's worse than if you had said no to both of them.
Exactly.
So it's hard to choose that.
Yeah. No.
I agree, and what the sister was saying over here, I think for me personally, when I start to feel animosity towards, when I can't get things done, or I stop enjoying things, I start to feel that animosity, I think to me, that's a red flag.
Yes.
Something's gonna.
That's really
gotta
good.
change.
Yeah, if you feel that animosity or bitterness welling up, that's a sign, okay, I need to take stock of where I'm at, and what yeses I'm saying yes to. Alpha, I think a lot of that has to do with, like protecting your ability to be enthusiastic about the work you're doing, right? Because the only way you can do that is to make sure you have the time to really, and the energy to really throw yourself into whatever it is you feel like God has called you to do. And so I think this is less about, you know, I think one way we can kind of perceive this is like, well, to say no to things because I'm really not working hard, right? That's not the case. It's, I want to work hard at the things I want to work hard at, right?
Right.
And so by saying no to some things, it means, man, yes, I can whatever I'm going to do, I'm gonna do it for the Lord enthusiastically. And I can do that because of the decisions I've made.
Sometimes when you let that animosity build up, you have a hard time trying to figure out if God is telling you to do it, or if, so there's another battle.
Yeah.
Boundaries are out. You're not fighting with yourself and everything within.
Yep.
I'd actually say, you can also, it doesn't have to be responsibilities. It can be as simple as like, oh, I want to do this, but I spend my time on my phone instead. So you're saying yes to spending your time doing something when you might want to be doing something else.
Right.
That you
Yeah,
may
and
not
that's-
even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
That's
Unless
right.
you step back and actually
Yeah,
think,
so
where has all my
taking
time
stock.
gone?
Yeah.
All right, Glenn, something you said made me think, so that first church I worked at, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was well on my way to burnout. Because it was my first church, and there's this great line about new ministers from a guy named Will Willimon, he's a seminary professor, who said, young ministers are quivering masses of availability. What do you need me to do? I'll do it. It takes a lot, you have to learn those boundaries, right? And what I found as I was approaching burnout was discernment was really hard. And I remember telling people, I can't tell if I am overworked or lazy. I can't tell the difference between those two things, right? Because I feel like there's a ton of stuff that I need to do that I'm not doing. That makes me feel lazy. But maybe I'm doing way more than I even realize and saying yes to too many things, right? And so it becomes hard to discern when you're in that place.
It's 10 till.
Oh, yeah, we're already over. Well, great conversation, guys. Thanks for being here. Let's go worship together.